Hey guys, this is Mr. O'Brien, and this is your Mr. O'Brien Science Health Series. So in this series, we talk about biology, chemistry, even some keystone biology review. So in this topic, we're going to be talking about the difference of prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. Again, prokaryotic cells are much simpler cells, and they actually believe that these were the first cells to form. They believe that it's the first cell because we are more simpler before we get more complex. And our eukaryotic cells are our more complex cells. Okay, these are the ones that contain organelles. Contains things like our mitochondria, endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi apparatus. So again, prokaryotic cell, much simpler cell, usually only composed of a few parts. Whereas our eukaryotic cell, as you can see, much more complex, almost like an entire city. So let's first talk about the prokaryotic cell. Now, prokaryotic cells are simpler and smaller cells than eukaryotic cells. So what we mean by simpler is that they're composed of less parts. As you can see, they're pretty simple. Now, bacteria is a good example of this. So bacteria are pretty much only composed of our cell membrane and our DNA on the inside. They're there to pretty much make you sick. So again, bacteria is the best example that we have. Now, what makes a prokaryotic cells and what distinguishes them is their lack of nucleus. So in any terms, when we mean lack of nucleus, they have nothing that encloses their DNA. They also don't have membrane-bound organelles, so things like the mitochondria, things like the nucleus, things like the endoplasmic reticulum, they're not there. As you can see, much simpler. Only DNA, cytoplasm, and some ribosomes. Now, the last thing that they have is that their DNA is circular in shape. So their DNA is actually almost like a ring, and that's different than our eukaryotic cells, which are linear and made of many, many different ones. So when we look at a prokaryotic cell, it contains a few things. It contains a cell membrane, which is the outside covering of the cell. It contains cytoplasm, which is the liquid that kind of allows everything to be held in place and move around. It contains flagella, which are our movement mechanism. It's like a long whip. It also contains things, or it also could be cilia, which are tiny hair-like structures. And finally, it contains ribosomes, which is the site of protein production. So our prokaryotic cell is pretty simple. It usually takes a pill-shaped. Now, obviously, this is not drawn to scale, but you kind of get the idea. So this right here would be our cell membrane, the outside covering of the cell. Now on the inside is our DNA. Now our DNA is not contained in a sac, it just kind of is floating around in that location. So again, DNA is in that location there. Now we also have these little sites where proteins are produced called ribosomes. And then finally, all this black space that you see here inside of the cell is what's referred to as our cytoplasm. All right? So the cytoplasm is just kind of that liquid that is contained in there. And now off this, there could be a long hair-like, whip-like structure that's used for movement. That would be our flagella. But you see, a lot simpler, a lot less complex. Now, eukaryotic cells, those are much larger and much more complex than prokaryotic cells. And what really makes how you distinguish a eukaryotic cell is the presence of a nucleus or a nuclear-bound membrane. So as you can see, all these different structures, mitochondria, nucleus that contains the DNA, endoplasmic reticulum, lysosomes, those are all contained inside of the cell. Now, the most important things that you're going to see in a eukaryotic cell are the nucleus, which is our distinguishing characteristic, also our organelles. So when we talk about organelles, we're talking about all the little parts that are contained in it. So our eukaryotic cell does contain a cell membrane as well. that holds everything in place. Now I'm just going to draw some of the more simple things. We're going to start with the nucleus. Now the nucleus is contains our DNA, and it holds all that in place. Usually the DNA is just kind of like a plate of spaghetti. So again, this is our nucleus, contains our DNA. Now we also have our endoplasmic reticulum. Okay, just going to draw that as ER. We have other things such as the peroxisomes. The peroxisomes are almost like the garbage men. Okay, they break things down. Okay, we have the Golgi apparatus, which is our final modification method before we ship things out of the cell. Also called the Golgi bodies. And the most important thing that we have for at least animals is the mitochondria. This is where ATP is made. Now, as you can see, there's many different parts within the eukaryotic cell, but the most important one is this nucleus, as well as the organelles that are contained in it. So, if we compare these two different cells, okay, eukaryotic cells and prokaryotic cells. So obviously eukaryotic cells are a bigger cell. They're much larger. They also contain organelles, or membrane-bound organelles, that make or do all the parts of it. The most important one that we have is the nucleus. And they also have linear or straight line DNA. Now prokaryotic cells are smaller, less complex. They have circular DNA, as well as no nucleus or nuclear-bound membranes. Now, last thing they both have membranes surrounding it. They both have cytoplasm. And they both have ribosomes. So, this is our video on eukaryotic and prokaryotic cells. Hopefully this little video helps you understand that a little bit better. This is Mr. O'Brien, signing.